What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back, and as always, thank you for joining me. My name's Paul Brettel, and today we are here to talk about my big takeaways from the Green Bay Packers releasing their unofficial team depth chart on Tuesday. But before we dive into that, as always, follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. You can find all my work, including this article, over at Dairyland Express, as well as Packers Wire. Hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. Now, before we dive into I have 10 takeaways and then just some quick notes after that. It's an unofficial depth chart. A preseason game has not been played yet. As of me recording this, the Green Bay Packers still haven't even had one of their joint practices yet. Their first one's going to be with Cincinnati on Wednesday afternoon. So everything that's talked about here, of course, should be taken with a grain of salt. There's still a lot that's to be determined. And in fact, just last week, Matt LaFleur told us before one of the practices that just because someone's running with the ones doesn't mean that's necessarily where they're going to end up, and vice versa. If they're with their twos or threes, doesn't necessarily mean that's where they're going to end up there. He does not want the players worrying about or thinking about where they stand on the depth chart at this time. He said the sole focus is for them to get better every day. That means maximizing their opportunities, being deliberate in what they do, knowing the ins and outs of their specific responsibilities and everything they're asked to do. So I just wanted to give that caveat that this is, maybe just a little glimpse on where things stand, but there's a lot to be determined. And ultimately, where players stand on the unofficial depth chart now doesn't mean a lot a couple weeks from now when the final roster is going to be put out. But with that said, let's dive into my big takeaways from the Packers unofficial depth chart. First up, Bo Melton is listed as the sixth wide receiver. He and Malik Heath are competing for that role right now. Both have had a strong week of practices. I would say that through training camp, at least, Bo Melton has been the more consistent player of the two. But as we know, Malik Heath had a really strong offseason programs. And again, he had a really good family night practice in Lambeau Field, had 2 touchdowns, including a really long catch and run in that game. So both players have been playing well. Bo Melton, like I said, is the sixth wide receiver. He's a speedy guy. He ran a 4.34 coming out of Rutgers. We've seen him used a lot in the slot. And a lot of his opportunities have come on quick passes, either a slant or a quick in-breaking route, a quick out-breaking route, just to get him the ball quickly and in space where he can use that speed. We've also seen him targeted downfield a few times, again, because he has the ability to stretch the field vertically and really stress defenses. So he's found the end zone a few times in practice. So he right now is listed as wide receiver 6. Again, Malik Heath's competing with him for that role. And I asked Matt LaFleur about each of these guys prior to Monday's practice. He said that they've both flashed. Mentioned that they're very different receivers, Melton and Heath. Melton is, I believe, 6'2", 213 pounds. Matt LaFleur called him very physical. And Melton, meanwhile, LaFleur called him scrappy and commented on just how fast he is. So 2 different very style of receivers. Again, said they have both flashed, but ultimately the momentum that each of these players have built, they're going to have to carry into the preseason if they're really going to cement themselves on this 53-man roster. And of course, as I discussed on Tuesday's video, we can't forget about Grant Dubose either. He was just activated off the non-football injury list, a draft pick this year, which does matter. The Packers have, especially with these final few roster spots, they have preferred to keep their own draft pick. So he's definitely playing catch up. You can work as hard as you want off the field, but as Matt LaFleur said, there's no replacement for those live practice reps to implement what's being taught. So he's going to play catch up, but those are the names to watch for that 6th wide receiver role. And I won't go too far into the weeds because I know I've touched on this before, but I'm still not completely sold on the Packers even keeping 6 receivers. If it happens, I'm not going to be surprised whatsoever, but we've seen a ton of 2 tight end, 2 running back sets in training camp. Obviously, when you have 2 of those players, 2 tight ends, for example, plus a running back, that limits the number of receivers on the field or vice versa. Also, with how active the running backs are, how active the tight ends are in the pass game, the 6th wide receiver is not going to have a big role on offense. In fact, might be non-existent. So these guys are also going to have to find a way to contribute on special teams if either of them are going to make a really strong push for this final roster. Sticking with the wide receiver position, Samori Toure was listed ahead of Jaden Reed as the top slot wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. As I said at the beginning, all of this should be taken with a grain of salt, but especially this one. We're going to see these two in particular both used quite a bit this season, I imagine. So whether one's listed as the third option on the depth chart or fourth, I don't see it carrying a ton of weight in terms of what their actual playing time is going to be. And with that said, Jaden Reed has already seen a ton of action with the ones. I would say even more so than Samori Toure at this point. Where Toure has stood out is in terms of targets from Jordan Love. I feel like when they really get into team drills, we've seen Samori Toure come down with a few more receptions in that capacity. And perhaps that's he's only a year in. He had just over 100 snaps last year, but perhaps that's showing some of the experience that he has, in the NFL, in the Matt LaFleur offense, that's, given him a bit of a leg up in that regard. Now, having said that, Jaden Reed has come on very strong over these last few practices as well, making several catches in each of them, including a touchdown catch during the red zone drill on Monday. So Samori Toure is listed over Reed in the slot. Bounce into the running back position. Patrick Taylor is listed at running back 3 over Tyler Goodson and Lou Nichols. In terms of offensive performance, Goodson's been the more impressive player. Also just brings more potential contributions in that regard. He's been used in the motion or gadget role, lining up in the slot, backfield, out wide, getting the ball on jet sweeps, on end arounds. So I think we're going to see more of that style in this offense with Jordan Love at quarterback. So even though he's not going to be on the field a ton as a traditional ball carrier, that is a way for him to make an impact on this team. Now, with that said, both Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur talked just last week about how it's going to be special teams, it's going to be blocking, pass catching that ultimately decide who the third running back is. And at least in special teams, that's where Patrick Taylor may have the edge. It was because of special teams that he was the third running back option for much of last season. During the family night practice, he was working with the starting special teams unit in a few phases. Tyler Goodson is going to have to find a way to carve out a role in that phase of the game if, to help increase his chances of being on this final roster. After Taylor, Goodson was listed as the 5th running back. Lou Nichols, who's currently been out the last 2 practices with a shoulder injury, is listed as the 6th. And perhaps because the Packers are rotating the running backs, Matt LaFleur said that each preseason game, one of the running backs is going to be featured for maybe a half, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but they're going to give each of those 3 running backs I mentioned the opportunity to be the guy in a game. And during Monday's practice, as I mentioned on yesterday's video, we saw Patrick Taylor taking more reps with the starters, with the ones, than what he had previously. So I do wonder if this game Friday night in Cincinnati is going to be his opportunity to be the guy. And who knows, perhaps that could be a reason why he was listed as the 3rd running back on the depth chart ahead of this game. Next up, not surprising, Zach Tom's listed as a starting right tackle. He's been there pretty much all of training camp and even going back to the offseason programs. We know Zach Tom's going to be a part of this starting 5 on the offensive line. But the question is it going to be at center or is it going to be at right tackle? And as I've talked about before, offensive line plays the sum of the parts are greater than the individual. A really good left side, but a bad right side is going to make the overall performance of the offensive line probably not very good. So where's the biggest talent gap? Is it between Tom and Myers at center or Tom and Yash Nyman at right tackle? Sticking with the offensive line, Rasheed Walker was listed over Caleb Jones. So Walker was the 4th offensive tackle option behind Bakhtiari and Zach Tom, of course, and then Yash Nyman was with that second unit as well with Walker. And so that bumped Caleb Jones to the third team offense on the depth chart. Now, why that's noteworthy to me anyways, I felt that based on what I had seen in practice, along with Caleb Jones occasionally more so during offseason programs, getting some reps with the starters that Walker wasn't getting, during practices or drills where maybe David Bakhtiari wasn't participating. So I took that as Caleb Jones being ahead of him, but they have Walker listed ahead of him on the depth chart. Now, again, a few caveats to this. Rasheed Walker's been the left tackle with the twos. Caleb Jones been the right tackle with the twos. Yash Nyman is listed as a right tackle because that's the position he's competing for. So perhaps the reason Caleb Jones was bumped and not Walker is because, well, Yash is listed as a right tackle. Maybe if Yash was listed as a left tackle, it would have been Rasheed Walker who was bumped. So again, goes back to the beginning of all this. We need to take it all with a grain of salt. And what happens on the field in these preseason games and joint practices are going to be the ultimate deciding factor. But nonetheless, it's noteworthy because, if Jones is behind Walker or it ends up vice versa, that second player at that tackle position is not guaranteed a roster spot. That player is going to be fighting for, a chance on the 53-man roster. And I've talked about it before, but as we look ahead to 2024, a lot of question marks at the tackle position. This could be Bakhtiari's last year. Yash Nyman's an unrestricted free agent. All of a sudden, this position of strength and depth could have a ton of question marks around it next year. So I do think it's very much in play that, and I'll have another video coming out soon where I go through my 53-man roster prediction, that both Jones and Walker make the team because of, foreshadowing, forecasting, looking ahead to next offseason when tackle could be a big need. But nonetheless, the second guy between these two is not guaranteed a roster spot. So that's why it's worth keeping our eyes on. At tight end, Tyler Davis is listed ahead of Tucker Kraft. And up until the last few practices, that's pretty much how it's been. If I were building out the depth chart, Luke Musgrave would be tight end 1, and that's how we ended up being on this one. Josiah DeGuara would be tight end 2. We'll talk about where he is on this depth chart in a few minutes. And then I would have Tyler Davis 3 and Tucker Kraft 4, again, just based on playing time. Tyler Davis has carved out a role in this offense as a blocker, an aspect that can be very, very challenging for rookie tight ends. It comes with a very, very steep learning curve. And as we know, it's a very, very important part of the Matt LaFleur offense. So he's been able to provide stability in that capacity. And so I'm guessing that's a big reason why he's listed ahead of Tucker Kraft. Now, with that said, during a lot of the 2 tight end sets we've seen over the last few practices, going back to family night, Tucker Kraft has been that second tight end next to Luke Musgrave. Kraft's also coming off of what I thought was easily his best practice of training camp during the family night game. Made several receptions, threw some key blocks in the run game. A really, really sound performance from him. So Tyler Davis is tight end 3 right now, the tight end ahead of Tucker Kraft. But again, Kraft, Davis, Musgrave, they're all going to see their share of playing time this year. They all bring unique skill sets to the offense and are going to have specific roles that they're going to be asked to fill. Jumping over to the defensive side, JJ Enagbari, he's the 5th edge rusher. So he is behind Justin Hollins and behind Lucas Van Ness. And that position group has really started to take shape over the last couple practices. Obviously, Rashawn Gary's back in the mix. Him and Preston Smith are going to be 1 and 2. We've seen a ton of Lucas Van Ness getting starting reps at edge rusher across from Preston Smith. And then throughout OTAs and as well as training camp here, Justin Hollins has seen snaps with the starters as well. Of those 5 guys, excluding Gary because he's missed most of practices on the PUP list, Enagbari is really the only one who has not seen any sort of steady reps with the starters at this point. So not surprising that he's in the position that he's in. Also of note at the edge rusher position is that Hollins was listed as the 3rd option, again, ahead of Enagbari and Van Ness. From a salary cap standpoint, Justin Hollins is not a roster lock. If the Packers were to release him, they would incur a dead cap hit, I believe, of $155,000. Really nothing to an NFL franchise. So from a cap standpoint, he is not guaranteed a roster spot. But seeing him listed as 3rd on the depth chart here, seeing all the snaps that he's gotten with the starters, he's gotten some starting special team snaps as well. Last season, he came in and made an impact right away against the run, against the pass. Pass game coordinator Jason Rebrovich talked about how almost immediately he took on a leadership role in that edge rusher room last season. So there's a lot of things that point to Justin Hollins being on this roster, even though he, like I said, from a cap perspective, he's not guaranteed in that capacity. Brenton Cox was listed at edge rusher 6. I know he's an undrafted rookie that's got garnered a ton of attention because of the high upside that he brings. He has pretty much spent all of practice with the third team defense, and the consistency or the flashes just haven't been there a ton up to this point. So, but definitely someone to keep watching as the joint practices preseason unfolds. Jump into safety. Rudy Ford was listed as a starter next to Darnell Savage, and that's pretty much been the case, again, through offseason programs and most of training camp up to this point. Outside of Savage, he has the second most defensive snaps in Barry's defense, did a really good job providing stability last season, was a capable run defender, a willing tackler, and he was just positioned well. He did his job. He was where he was supposed to be, which I know sounds simple, but it's something that this safety position was lacking last season, and it led to some playmaking opportunities. He had 3 interceptions. He had a fumble recovery. So he's consistently been next to Savage. Over the last 3 practices, Jonathan Owens has been the starter next to Darnell Savage, and Matt LaFleur said that they're going to do a lot of rotating at this position to not only determine roster spots, but playing time as well. So Owens was listed as the third safety. Tavarius Moore was the 4th option, and that's, again, what we've seen so far. Those two have been, or Moore's been running mostly with the second team defense. Anthony Johnson, Dallin Leavitt were the 5th and 6th options on the depth chart. Anthony Johnson has spent pretty much every practice with the third team defense. I know he's a really exciting player. A lot of Packer fans were happy that they were able to draft him, especially in the 7th round. Has the ability to fill an Adrian Amos-like role in this defense with his willingness to fly downhill, to fill gaps, to make tackles, to be able to play in the box. But this is only a second year playing safety. His first 4 years at Iowa State were at boundary cornerback. So not only is he making the jump from college to the NFL, but he's relatively new to the position he's playing as well. So a lot of learning, a lot of development that still needs to take place there. And then Dallin Leavitt, he's on this roster to be a special teams contributor, has played his entire career under Rich Bisaccia, was a core contributor last season. And, Rodgers last season, on an occasion or two talked about just the locker room presence that Leavitt brings. So doesn't bring we're not going to see him on the field defensively. So I think it's fair to ask, is just contributing on special teams at a position with so many question marks enough to secure a roster spot? If I were guessing right now, I would say yes, because it is Dallin Leavitt and for all the reasons just mentioned, but something to monitor moving forward. Next up, Innis Gaines. He was listed as the backup slot cornerback behind Keyshawn Nixon. Now, I'm not sure where Gaines fits on the roster. We just went through the safety group. At most, the Packers are probably keeping 5. Add him to the mix with Johnson, Leavitt. That's 7 guys. At the cornerback room, a ton of depth, a ton of talent there, especially once Eric Stokes returns and comes off the PUP list. I mean, again, it's tough to see where he fits into either of those position groups from a number standpoint. But he's someone who can contribute in a variety of ways, and that's really, really important for a back end of the roster player. Despite being 19th in special team snaps on the Packers last season, he ranked 6th on the team in solo tackles, showing some playmaking ability. During family night, we saw him starting on a few special teams units. He's the backup nickel cornerback to Keyshawn Nixon. For all the talent that this position group has, they don't have really any other true nickels. Razul Douglas, Eric Stokes, they're boundary guys. Carrington Valentine, Corey Ballantyne, they're boundary guys. Jair, you just want wherever the best receiver is, whether that's inside or out. Shamar John Charles was a boundary cornerback in college. The Packers moved him inside to play nickel, but his path to the roster looks pretty non-existent or close to it at this point. So Gaines can provide value in that capacity, being the backup, and we saw him play over 30 slot snaps during the final 3 games of last season, and then he's listed as a safety. So if injuries were to happen at that position, you got someone else on the back end of the roster who could fill in that capacity as well. So, as the saying goes in football, the more you can do, and Ennis Gaines can really do a lot for this Packers team. All right, couple more. Special teams. Pat O'Donnell's listed ahead of Daniel Whelan. This punter competition is much more real than what I thought it was going to be before training camp started. Whelan's been incredibly impressive in terms of the power that he packs. The Packers are alternating holding opportunities for him and O'Donnell, which to me, trying to read the tea leaves, says that they are taking a true look at him to see if he's someone who could unseat Pat O'Donnell. The potential concern is that if you have a rookie kicker, you have a rookie holder. I mean, there's a lot of risks involved in that, especially with an offense, a young offense that may struggle to put up points, making those extra points, capitalizing on those field goal opportunities. Obviously, points always matter, but it really feels like it's going to be at a premium this year. So something to keep our eyes on. O'Donnell still got the nod over Whelan. And for the reason just mentioned about the rookie kicker, rookie holder, if I were guessing right now, I would still give O'Donnell the edge, but also worth keeping in mind if the Packers do release Pat O'Donnell, they save $1.5 million in cap space. A few quick notes. Josiah DeGuara, he was listed as a fullback. The Packers haven't had a fullback on their roster since 2019, Matt LaFleur's first season when he inherited Danny Vitale. DeGuara's technical role is as an H-back. He's listed on the Packers roster as a tight end. In watching individual drills, it's been him and undrafted rookie Henry Pearson, who's listed on the site on the Packers roster as a fullback, going through individual drills before they merge with the rest of the tight ends. And when they're together, they're doing a lot of blocking out of the backfield. So interesting note there that DeGuara has been given the title of fullback. Kenny Clark was listed as a defensive end instead of a nose tackle, where he spent most of his career. With TJ Slayton taking on a larger role, he's going to play a lot more snaps and take those nose tackle A-gap snaps. So that's great news for Kenny Clark and the Packers defense, because now he can line up further away from the center at defensive end. And typically when you move away from the center guard combos, you get more one-on-one opportunities. And of course, more one-on-one opportunities for Kenny Clark is always a good thing. Luke Musgrave, as I mentioned, listed as a starting tight end. That's been the case for him since OTAs. As Matt LaFleur said, he's different. His ability to impact the passing game. I'm just really excited to see how the offense comes together and looks with him at the tight end position. His ability to stretch the field, down the seam, be a threat over the middle, yak opportunities, creating mismatches, creating other opportunities for others in the offense with the attention he draws, the spacing he creates. Just a really exciting player to have in this Packers offense. And then lastly, I mentioned Zach Tom's a starting right tackle. So that means that Josh Myers was listed as a starting center. This is absolutely a competition that's taking place. Matt LaFleur said that they have to see more consistency from Josh Myers. And one of the major issues, along with that inconsistency, has been the exchange between him and Love. There have been 3 fumbles already between those two during training camp so far. So absolutely something worth keeping our eyes on. So there you have it, my 10 big takeaways from the Packers unofficial depth chart being released, along with a few other extra notes. As always, I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I greatly appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel, and you can find all my work over at Dairyland Express as well as Packers Wire. So until next time, friends, take care, stay safe, and as always, go Pack.